The wind howled across the Carpathian highlands like a chorus of starving wolves, curling through the broken towers of the dread fort, an ancient keep blackened by soot and sin. Its turrets stood crooked against the night sky, choked in ivy and rot. Beneath the stone belly of the castle, down corridors that had never seen sunlight, a man in chains dragged his bare feet across the icy flagstones. The guards didn't speak. They were cowled in iron, faceless beneath their visors. Only the jangle of his shackles and the labored hiss of his breath filled the air. That man was once Emperor Leontius IV. They brought him not to a cell, but to the throne room. The hall hadn't changed. It still stank of old incense and the perfumed bones of saints. Along the colonnades, pale statues of past emperors loomed like silent accusers. But where once tapestries of divine conquest had hung, there were only clawed remnants, and dried blood crusted on the floor like wax drippings from a dying candle. Upon the throne sat not a king, but a spider. His name was Cosimo Vorn. The emperor's grand inquisitor once, now garbed in regal crimson. His narrow face was as white as chalk, and his eyes held the gleam of a man who never prayed, only judged. On his left sat the Bishop of Vardos, swollen and blind, lips cracked with plague sores. On his right stood Lady Ines, the emperor's cousin, who had once whispered dreams of reform in his ear, now wearing mourning black with a serpent brooch at her throat. Leontius, bruised and barefoot, lifted his head. "You sit where traitors burn." Cosimo smiled thinly. "And yet here I sit, and you grovel." He snapped his fingers. The guards stepped back. A court scribe began reading charges in a droning voice: heresy, debauchery, slaughter of the innocent, conspiring with Moors and pagans, fornication with witches, and, finally, apostasy, the worst sin of all. Leontius had outlawed the rite of cruciformity, once sacred in the realm. He had abolished burnings at the stake, freed heretics from the dungeons of the White Priory, and dared to say the gods could be silent. For this, he would be unmade. "I saved this empire," Leontius rasped, blood at the corner of his mouth. "I ended the famine. I brought water to the east. You made peasants think they were men," Cosimo said, rising. "You tore down the walls between the sacred and the profane. And worst of all, you were merciful." Lady Ines stepped forward. "Your people cry for justice. The fields lie fallow. The north is in revolt. The people howl for their shepherd, but you led them into shadow. The only shadow is the church," Leontius spat. The bishop groaned, drooling. "He will not confess." "No," Cosimo said, voice thick with pleasure. "But he will die." There was no trial. There was no appeal. The emperor was to be stripped of all titles and entombed alive in the chapel of the forgotten, a cursed place far beyond the Iron Pass, where no sun touched the earth and no prayer reached the heavens. But Cosimo had other plans. "Let the world forget him," he declared. "Let his name be eaten from the stones." And as the bells tolled midnight, Leontius was dragged from the throne room, back through the freezing corridors. But not to the dungeon. The guards turned left where they should have turned right. Down, deeper into the ruined crypts. Past walls lined with skulls. Down, into the dark where beasts waited. He smelled them before he saw them. Flesh. Blood. Rot. And breath hot and heavy. Then the growl. Low. Hungry. Cosimo's voice echoed behind him. "You once called yourself the shepherd. Tonight, you meet your flock." A gate opened. Leontius was shoved forward. And the dogs began to stir. The air in the pit was wet and foul, the scent of decay clinging to every stone like a second skin. Leontius fell forward onto the dirt floor, his wrists still bound, scraping against the rough cavern walls. The torches that flickered along the edges cast grotesque shadows of bones and broken chains. The pit was far larger than he had imagined, a cathedral of cruelty carved beneath the mountain, and at its center waited a mass of shapes, twitching and coiled. Eyes glimmered like liquid gold. Teeth gleamed like shards of obsidian. The first growl came from the darkness, a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of his feet. Then another. And another. The air seemed to thicken, and he could hear the panting, the clawing, the shuffle of bodies waiting for him. "Do they truly hunger for the Emperor?" a voice called, echoing against the stone. It was Cosimo, perched atop a ledge like a malevolent god surveying his sacrifice. His crimson robe gleamed in the torchlight, and his thin smile promised that this night would be remembered long after the blood had dried. Leontius raised his head. "Dogs will not eat a king. I am the bloodline." "I am," a snarl interrupted him. A mass of fur lunged, scraping along the wall. One of the beasts, enormous, with eyes like smoldering coal, leapt forward and snapped at the air where his leg had just been. Leontius stumbled, and the chains rattled. He fell on his hands and knees, the ground slick with mud and something darker. They circled him. Not one, not two, but dozens. Wolves, mastiffs, and feral dogs, all bred for this single, horrifying purpose. They weren't merely animals, they were instruments of punishment, sharpened by hunger and bloodlust, trained to obey the cruelty of a madman. Cosimo's voice came again, echoing. "You once sat upon a throne. You commanded armies. And now?" He gestured to the creatures. "Now you are nothing." Leontius scrambled backward, pressing against the stone wall. The creatures fanned out, growling, eyes glinting, teeth bared. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was no escape. He could feel their heat, the brush of fur and the press of muscle, as if the air itself had become alive with menace. And then, in a moment of stark terror, he saw movement in the shadows behind the lead beasts. Smaller forms, creeping on all fours, faces obscured by hair and grime. Children. Or what had once been children. Orphans, thieves, perhaps those condemned by Cosimo to witness this horror, now transformed by cruelty into shadows of men. They hissed and chattered, their eyes wide, reflecting the torchlight, and one of them threw a stone at Leontius' head. Pain exploded across his skull. He stumbled, and the chains clanged. The largest dog lunged. He raised his arms to fend it off, but the creature's fangs sank into his shoulder. Pain lanced through his body, and he cried out, his voice echoing through the cavern like a bell of despair. More leapt. They were on him, dragging, biting, tearing. He felt the first slices of skin giving way under teeth, the smell of his own blood mingling with the reek of damp stone and rotting flesh. In the chaos, his mind turned inward. Images of his life flashed, the birth of his son in the cold stone chamber of the palace, the banners fluttering over the capital, the laughter of the court, the pleading eyes of peasants at famine's end. Could all this be undone by hunger and cruelty? He had ruled an empire, and now he fought merely to stay whole for another moment. And then he heard it, the howl. Not from the dogs, but from the pit itself. A long, bone-chilling sound that seemed to come from the stones, vibrating in his chest, reverberating inside his skull. The walls themselves seemed alive, whispering, mocking. The cavern expanded in his mind, becoming a living nightmare from which there could be no waking. One of the dogs bit deeper, pulling him to the ground. He struggled, clawed at the dirt, tried to roll free, but the weight and fury of them pressed him down. He felt the sharp crunch of his ribs beneath the teeth. Blood sprayed across the stone. The children or whatever they were chattered in the shadows, egging the beasts on. The roar of the animals mixed with the clanging of chains and the screams of a man who had once commanded nations. Cosimo's voice broke through the torment, closer now, more intimate. How does it feel, Emperor? To feel your power dissolve into nothing? Your titles, your armies, your laws useless. You are meat. You are prey. And soon, the mountain will swallow you whole, and no soul will remember your name. Leontius, weak and bleeding, tried to rise. His arms trembled, nails scraping against stone. A sudden surge of anger and fear primal, unthinking drove him to kick at the nearest dog. The beast yelped and lunged aside, giving him a brief opening. He scrambled toward the edge of the pit, toward a narrow ledge where the torchlight barely reached, a thread of hope. But the ledge was false. As he reached it, the stone beneath him crumbled. He fell, plunging deeper into the darkness, chains rattling, teeth snapping inches from his flesh. The cavern swallowed him with a cold, hollow inevitability. Then he hit the ground. Pain exploded in his back. His vision blurred. And in that instant, a chilling realization cut through the haze of terror: he was utterly alone. Not a sword, not a shield, not a servant to ease his agony. Only the hunger of beasts and the cruelty of men who had turned heaven into a tomb. The howl rose again, louder, angrier, closer. Leontius' eyes met those of the largest dog eyes that mirrored the same madness he had seen in Cosimo's gaze. And then, in the darkness, teeth closed over flesh. The scream that followed was swallowed by the cavern, echoing in eternity. Above him, Cosimo's laughter rang out like a bell tolling doom. Let the emperor be consumed. Let the mountain feast upon kings. And in that instant, the pit erupted into chaos once more, the sound of snapping jaws and splintering bones filling the cavern as the shadows grew hungrier still. Leontius clawed at the dirt, lungs heaving, as the weight of the creatures pressed down upon him. Pain radiated from every joint, every rib, every torn sinew. The biting teeth were merciless, the claws relentless, and yet the emperor's mind refused to surrender. Somewhere deep, beneath the agony and blood, a shard of defiance persisted. He remembered the throne room, the marble floors slick with the remnants of old sins, Cosimo's thin smile, Lady Ina's serpent-like glare. He remembered the chants of priests and the cries of the starving peasants. For a heartbeat, he remembered being a king. And that memory became a weapon. He kicked, twisted, rolled, every movement a desperate, instinctual ballet of survival. A dog latched onto his calf, he yanked, pulling with a surge of fury and pain. Its teeth tore flesh, and he felt the warm trickle of blood down his leg. But as he rolled aside, another dog lunged past him, missing his throat by mere inches. The pit had become a living, breathing predator, and he was trapped inside its heart. And then he saw movement, a narrow shaft of torchlight slicing through the darkness. A ladder, carved crudely from stone, led upward, far above the writhing mass of fur and teeth. Salvation or death, he could not tell. But hope, however fragile, is a seed that roots even in the blackest soil. He tried to crawl toward it, dragging himself inch by bloody inch. The creatures were relentless, snapping at the heels of his hands, their snarls shaking the very stones. Pain and exhaustion threatened to claim him. His vision blurred, his head spun. And yet, With each movement, the memory of Cosimo's mockery burned in him, feeding a fire that refused to be quenched. "Do you think you can escape?" Cosimo's voice echoed from somewhere above, mocking, taunting. "You will not rise again. This pit will consume you. Every scream, every drop of blood, it is the hymn of your hubris." Leontius forced himself upward, fingertips scraping the rough stone. One hand reached the ladder. The chains rattled as the dogs lunged, teeth clashing inches from his face. He grabbed a rung, pulled with the last of his strength, and felt the stone dig into his palms. A shout tore from his throat, part fear, part rage. And then, as if the pit itself had a mind, the ground beneath him shifted. Rocks crumbled, and a massive dog, the leader of the pack, lunged with terrifying precision. It clamped its jaws onto his shoulder, knocking him from the ladder. Pain exploded through his body like fire. He hit the floor with a sickening thud. The chains wrapped around his wrists, cutting into the skin. Leontius tried to rise, but weakness betrayed him. His mind was fogged with the scent of blood and the overwhelming presence of death. And yet, in that moment, he noticed something unnatural. A figure, cloaked and silent, had slipped into the shadows above. Not a guard, not a beast, but a human, tall, lean, and pale as moonlight. The figure watched, unmoving, until the largest dog lunged for him again. Then, with a swift motion, the figure drew a long, curved blade and plunged it into the creature's side. The dog howled, collapsing in a flurry of fur and teeth, momentarily distracted. Leontius' eyes met the figure's cold, calculating, and merciless. But not malicious. There was a purpose there, something beyond cruelty. "Climb," the figure whispered, voice like silk over stone. "If you move, you survive. If you falter, you die." Somehow, by sheer will, Leontius dragged himself toward the ladder again. His palms bled. His legs trembled. The chain shackling him scraped against the stone like a shrieking banshee. But he climbed, rung by rung, muscles screaming, teeth gnashing against agony. Behind him, the sounds of the pit erupted: growls, snapping jaws, the wet thud of flesh against stone. At the top, the figure extended a hand. Leontius grasped it, and together they hauled themselves onto a narrow ledge carved into the cavern wall. For a moment, he could breathe just barely. The creatures snarled below, banging against the stone with fury and hunger. "You are far from safe," the figure said. "But not yet dead. Follow me." Leontius, trembling, nodded. Every movement was agony, every step a testament to the life that refused to abandon him. The ledge twisted and turned, narrowing into jagged passageways, winding upward like the spine of some great beast. From below, the sounds of the pit never ceased: dogs howling, chains clanging, blood spilling. Suddenly, the passage opened into a cavernous chamber. The walls were slick with moisture, and ancient bones littered the floor like forgotten offerings. In the center, a pool of stagnant water reflected the flickering torchlight, casting dancing shadows that made the chamber appear alive. And there, on a stone dais, sat a single object, a crown, blackened with age and encrusted with something that gleamed faintly red in the torchlight. Leontius' heart stuttered. He knew that crown. It was the fabled obsidian diadem of his ancestors, said to carry the power of kings and emperors, a relic that could inspire fear or obedience, even in the most savage of hearts. But before he could approach, the figure stopped him. "Do you see it?" the stranger whispered. "That crown is a trap. Take it, and you die." Leave it, and you may yet live. Leontius' mind raced. Hunger, blood, fear, and the weight of betrayal pressed upon him. Cosimo had designed this pit not merely to kill, but to torment, to twist the spirit, to corrupt hope into despair. Every step, every survival instinct, was baited with deception. A distant howl, louder than any before, cut through the chamber. The floor trembled beneath their feet. The pack below was not merely waiting. It was aware. And something darker moved in the shadows, something that even the largest dog obeyed without question. The stranger tightened a grip on Leontius' arm. "We do not have long," he said. "Cosimo is not content with waiting. He will come himself." A shadow fell across the entrance to the chamber. A chill so profound it seemed to freeze the very air swept through them. Leontius looked up. And in the darkness, he saw the glint of Cosimo's eyes, watching, smiling, savoring the despair about to unfold. The cliffhanger closed around him like a noose.